Hey, intro! Shut up a second. The Switch 2 seems to have just leaked. This is extremely convincing stuff. There's a bunch of renders and actual hardware pictures coming from a Chinese factory on a Chinese website, and it's found its way onto the English web via Reddit. And if you want to see these, you can click the link in the description below, but if I showed you firsthand, they would get us. They would come to us and they would get us good. So I'm going to explain what it looks like, but just imagine or click on those pictures. So first off, let's start with the specs, which were fully shared in a sheet. So this comes with a left Joy-Con, a right Joy-Con, the console itself, and a dock. Very, very familiar to the existing Switch, and the actual hardware looks extremely similar to the existing Switch. But it also comes with a CPU-GPU system on a chip. This is the GML X30RA1, my favorite of all the GPU-CPU system on a chips. And in terms of RAM, there's 2 sticks of 6GB RAM, 12GB total, at 7,500 MT a second, which for reference, Xbox Series models have 8,750 MT a second, so it's pretty close in comparison to those, especially considering Series S is 10GB of RAM rather than 12, found in the Switch 2. In terms of storage, this comes with 2,506GB of flash memory at 2,100 megabytes per second, which again is very comparable to the Series systems. They're 2,400 megabytes per second. So what I'm saying is, loading your Animal Crossing island will be much faster than whatever it is on Switch, which is really, really slow. It's got an NFC chip and a built-in microphone, which is very, very cool, dual cooling fans, and also HDMI 2.1, which of course most likely means is going to support 4K and HDR. The networking chip is a Realtek RTL8153B-VB-CG, my favorite of all of them, and the dock does have an Ethernet port as well. And in terms of the actual case, it's going to be 206 by 115 by 14 millimeters. Of course, that doesn't tell us absolutely everything of what it's capable of. We don't really know a whole lot about the actual system on a chip just from the name, but the surrounding specs are very impressive for a portable console. Now allow me to describe to you what the actual console looks like. It looks like a larger Switch. So they've done a side-by-side comparison with the Switch 2 and Switch 1, and Switch 2 is pretty massive in comparison. The bezel isn't too large, but this has an 8-inch screen rather than 6 inches of the original Switch, so imagine it being around 2 inches wider. But most other aspects of just the tablet itself are very similar. There's still a USB-C on the bottom where it docks in. It's still got those attachments at the bottom right next to the USB-Cs. The speakers are in around the same place. The kickstand's very similar to the Switch OLED, so it's not a flimsy little thing that comes out. It's instead a large piece of plastic that I imagine is quite versatile, just like the OLED one is. The top of the system has a power button, 2 volume buttons to go quieter and louder, the vent to cool the system, and then interestingly, both a headphone jack, a traditional one, and also a second USB-C. So I guess if you had USB-C headphones, you can charge the system from the bottom and also listen to music from the top, which is great. And then a traditional game cart flap, which looks very similar to the existing one, so I'm hoping most Switch 2 games have a similar form factor, meaning backwards compatibility. Anyway, what about the Joy-Con? Well, they are also very, very similar, only this time magnetic. The Joy-Con around the triggers have more of a groove where it comes out a bit more, which might also mean analog triggers, but it's quite hard to tell from just looking at them here. But along that groove is a big button, which I imagine when pressing will release the Joy-Con, much larger than the existing release button. But yeah, there's no rail. This will just attach via magnetism, which I imagine will mean no security exploits. But also my existing Switch gets quite wobbly on the Joy-Con rail, and this will probably alleviate that as well. The Joy-Con themselves are much larger to fit the size of the larger system, but they are more or less what you'd expect. SL and SR are also a lot larger, so playing when it's on its side as a single Joy-Con should be a lot more comfortable, especially when there's more real estate to actually hold the controller. But all in all, there's not a whole lot to really say about the Joy-Con. They look just like the Switch 1 Joy-Con, but larger. Only the right Joy-Con seemingly has another button. So usually the left Joy-Con has a capture button and the right one has a home button, and that's still true. But the right one also seemingly has another capture button? I can't quite tell. It could have another utility, but as far as I can tell, it looks like a second capture, which is just kind of odd. There's also more of a traditional connector in there, like a power connector, so I imagine when you put them onto the Switch model, that's kind of what charges them. I don't know if you can just charge through magnetism alone, so maybe that's necessary for that. So what does all this mean? Well, just looking at the hardware renders, the shots of the console itself, and also the specs, it's a fairly conservative take on a Switch successor. There isn't really a huge gimmick, that we know of at least, that separates it from the previous one. It's just a bigger, more powerful Switch with magnetic Joy-Con. But in terms of the specs themselves, they are very impressive. There's a lot in here that exceeds the Xbox Series S and goes a bit more Xbox Series X level. And of course there's also DLSS, which is going to bridge that gap even further. But a lot still lies on what is possible via the system on a chip. We don't quite know the capabilities of that yet, nor do we know the clock speeds or anything like that. So there is still a few unknowns here. But assuming this is all real, which I strongly believe it is, hell yeah. Hell yeah, everybody. There was always a chance Nintendo would say, like, oh, let's put an umbrella on it. Let's just give it a big old swirly umbrella. You never know what they're going to do, these guys. So this just seems like a normal Switch successor. And that's exciting. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll catch you next time.